He used to decode memories for a secret government agency, extracting truth from minds that refused to speak. Now Thomas Hale pushed a mop across corporate floors, raising his 12-year-old daughter on minimum wage and silence. 3 years of perfect invisibility, until the morning when Eden Tech's CEO vanished without a trace, and only one man possessed the forgotten skills to read the clues everyone else had missed. Thomas arrived at Eden Tech Corporation every morning at 6:47, 30 minutes before the first executives would stumble through the glass doors, clutching their coffee cups like lifelines. At 43, his weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency across surfaces that powerful people touched but never truly saw. The janitorial uniform hung loose on his tall frame, and his graying hair was kept just long enough to cast shadows over eyes that had once been his most dangerous weapon. Those eyes had memorized classified documents in seconds, spotted lies in micro-expressions, and cataloged evidence that could topple governments. Now they tracked dust patterns on marble floors and noted which waste paper baskets needed emptying. The transformation from elite operative to invisible maintenance worker had been deliberate, calculated, and absolutely necessary for survival. His daughter Emily waited for him each evening in their cramped apartment above Martinez's delicatessen, her bright smile a daily reminder of what he was protecting. She never complained about the peanut butter sandwiches or the second-hand clothes from the thrift store, though Thomas sometimes caught her staring at the photograph of her mother with questions burning in her young eyes. Sarah had died 3 years ago in what the police report called a traffic accident, but Thomas knew better. Brake lines didn't sever themselves, and professional assassinations rarely looked like random misfortune. His final mission for the agency had ended with 3 dead operatives and a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. The price of his family's safety had been his complete erasure from that world. In his wallet, folded between 2 $20 bills that represented his entire emergency fund, Thomas carried a piece of paper with 5 words written in fading blue ink. Memory is burden, forgetting is betrayal. His partner Marcus Webb had whispered those words with his last breath, bleeding out in a Prague alley while enemy operatives closed in around them. Thomas had carried the message for 1,095 days, unsure whether remembering or forgetting would prove to be the greater sin. The 17th floor of Eden Tech housed the corporate executives, and Thomas had learned to read the building's daily rhythms like a complex musical score. He knew that Dr. Margaret Patterson arrived at 7:15 with her ritual cup of lavender tea, that Chief Financial Officer David Kim worked past midnight every Thursday reviewing quarterly projections, and that CEO Valerie Kessler kept a small framed photograph of her deceased mother hidden behind her computer monitor. Thomas understood the weight of secrets and the price of hidden truths. Every morning, as he emptied trash bins and wiped down conference tables, he observed the subtle signs of corporate anxiety. Shredded documents that hadn't made it completely into waste baskets, coffee stains on classified folders, and the nervous energy that radiated from executives who carried burdens they couldn't share with their families. Emily was his anchor to humanity, the reason he had chosen invisibility over vengeance when his former life exploded around him. She possessed her mother's quick intelligence and stubborn courage, traits that both comforted and terrified Thomas as he watched her navigate the complexities of adolescence without understanding the dangerous world her father had once inhabited. Their evening routine was sacred and simple. Emily would spread her homework across their kitchen table while Thomas prepared dinner from whatever ingredients their tight budget allowed. He helped her with mathematics and science, subjects that came naturally to his analytical mind, while she shared stories about her classmates and teachers that reminded him of the normal world he was trying to protect. But normalcy was an illusion Thomas could maintain only through constant vigilance and perfect discipline. He varied his routes home from work, memorized the faces of everyone in their neighborhood, and kept emergency cash hidden in 3 separate locations throughout their small apartment. The skills that had once made him an elite operative now served the humble purpose of keeping his daughter safe from enemies who believed he was already dead. Dr. Rachel Vaughn entered Thomas's carefully ordered world like a stone thrown into still water, creating ripples that would eventually become tsunamis. As Eden Tech's new senior consultant for neural data systems, she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most intelligent person in any room. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her gray eyes held the intensity of someone who viewed advanced technology as humanity's salvation. Thomas first encountered her in the main laboratory when she accidentally knocked over her coffee while examining the chronocyte memory analysis prototype. As he cleaned up the spilled liquid, Fragments of her conversation with the development team penetrated his carefully maintained facade of disinterest. The core neural mapping architecture is absolutely remarkable, she was saying, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface with practiced familiarity. These memory extraction algorithms are nearly identical to the Morrison-Webb theoretical framework from the classified Project Recall research. Whoever designed this system had direct access to government files that were supposedly destroyed years ago. Thomas felt his blood turn to ice water in his veins. The Morrison-Webb framework had been his creation, named after his mentor Dr. Elizabeth Morrison and his operational partner Marcus Webb. That research was supposed to have been incinerated, along with every other trace of Project Recall, when the program was terminated under mysterious circumstances. Rachel continued analyzing the code, her voice carrying the excitement of someone who had discovered something extraordinary. These neural pathway mapping sequences are more sophisticated than anything published in current academic literature. The integration of memory extraction and implantation protocols suggests someone with intimate knowledge of classified cognitive research designed this technology. Thomas forced his hands to maintain their steady cleaning motions while his mind raced through implications and possibilities. The chronocyte system was officially designed to help trauma victims recover suppressed memories, but he recognized the underlying architecture that could just as easily extract information from unwilling subjects or implant false recollections. Later that day, Thomas observed Rachel meeting privately with CEO Valerie Kessler in the executive conference room. Their conversation appeared tense, with both women leaning forward across the polished table in the universal posture of people sharing dangerous secrets. Thomas couldn't hear their words, but their body language communicated urgency and fear. Rachel left the meeting carrying a briefcase she hadn't brought with her, while Valerie remained in the conference room staring out the windows at the city skyline with the expression of someone who had just learned uncomfortable truths about her own company. That evening, Thomas walked home through streets that felt subtly different, as if the familiar neighborhood had shifted around him while he wasn't paying attention. The sensation was one he remembered from operational deployments, the prickling awareness that came when hostile eyes were cataloging his movements and preparing for action. Emily was waiting at their kitchen table with her homework spread across the scarred surface, but her usual cheerful greeting was replaced by a question that confirmed Thomas's worst fears. "Dad, why was there a man watching our building today?" Thomas set down his keys with deliberate care, his operational training automatically taking control of his responses. "What kind of man, sweetheart?" "He was across the street when I got home from school. White guy, maybe around your age, wearing a gray jacket. He stood there for maybe 20 minutes, just staring up at our windows. When Mrs. Martinez came outside to sweep the sidewalk, he walked away, but I think I've seen him before." Thomas knelt beside Emily's chair, his hands gentle on her shoulders while his mind calculated threat assessments and response protocols. The 3 years of careful anonymity were crumbling around him, and the enemies who believed him dead were closing in on the only thing in the world that mattered to him. The next morning arrived with autumn rain drumming against the windows of EdenTech Corporation, and Thomas discovered that someone had been manipulating the building's security systems during the overnight hours. The cameras on the 17th floor showed subtle signs of recent adjustment, angles shifted by degrees that would be invisible to casual observation, but were glaringly obvious to someone trained in surveillance detection. In the executive break room, Thomas found evidence of another unauthorized meeting. Coffee cups still warm in the dishwasher, crumbs from pastries that weren't part of the building's standard catering service, and the lingering scent of expensive cologne that didn't belong to any of the regular staff members. Rachel Vaughn arrived 30 minutes later than usual, her confident demeanor replaced by visible tension that manifested in nervous glances around the laboratory and protective clutching of her laptop bag. She carried equipment she hadn't brought the previous day, and her eyes held the haunted look of someone who had recently learned dangerous truths. Thomas was cleaning windows on the 18th floor when raised voices from CEO Valerie Kessler's office drew his attention. Through the partially open door, he could observe Rachel and Valerie engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument, their voices low but their body language broadcasting conflict and fear. "The unauthorized modifications were implemented without my direct approval," Valerie was saying, her tone carrying corporate authority mixed with personal anxiety. "I specifically instructed the development team that no changes should be made to the chronocyte system without written authorization from my office." Rachel's response carried desperation beneath professional composure. "Miss Kessler, The enhancements I've integrated into the memory recovery protocols could revolutionize treatment for millions of trauma victims. We're on the verge of breakthroughs that could heal psychological wounds previously considered permanent. We're also dealing with technology that could be weaponized by people with hostile intentions, Valerie interrupted. Dr. Vaughn, I need you to reverse those modifications immediately and provide complete documentation of every change you've made to our systems. At 11:47, Eden Tech's emergency communication system activated with an automated announcement that all employees should remain at their workstations while security conducted a routine inspection. But Thomas recognized the protocols from his previous life, and this was definitely not routine. His encrypted phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Your daughter remains safe for now. Conference room B, 17th floor. Come alone. Thomas felt the familiar emotional shutdown that had kept him alive through dozens of dangerous operations. He climbed the emergency stairwell to the 17th floor, his mind automatically cataloging exit routes and potential weapons, while his body moved with practiced efficiency. Conference room B contained only a manila folder placed precisely in the center of the polished table. Inside, Thomas discovered surveillance photographs of Emily walking to school, sitting in their apartment, eating ice cream at the park. A yellow note was attached to the final photograph. Impressive young lady. Would be unfortunate if something disrupted her routine. The folder also contained architectural blueprints of Eden Tech's secure facilities, an electronic keycard bearing Rachel's credentials, and typed instructions. Retrieve Morrison, web source code. 2 hours. Thomas crushed the threatening note but kept the other materials, his operational training analyzing the tactical situation. Someone knew his real identity and his greatest vulnerability. The 3 years of perfect invisibility had been nothing more than an elaborate deception. Rachel found him in the laboratory 20 minutes later, her laptop clutched against her chest and fear evident in her gray eyes. You're not really a janitor, she said quietly. And you're not really here to help trauma victims, Thomas replied. The question is whether we're on the same side. Rachel led him to a corner where security cameras had limited coverage. My real name is Rachel Morrison Vaughn. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison was my mother. The revelation struck Thomas like a physical blow. Elizabeth Morrison had been his mentor, the brilliant neuroscientist who developed the theoretical foundations for memory manipulation technology. She had died 6 months before Project Recall was terminated, and Thomas had always suspected the timing was more than coincidental. She left me encrypted research files that I've spent 5 years decoding, Rachel continued. When I discovered the chronocyte system, I realized someone had stolen her life's work and was using it for purposes she never intended. Thomas's phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Code Silver. Executive security incident. All personnel report to safe areas immediately. They rushed to the executive floor to find controlled chaos. Security personnel were sealing Valerie Kessler's office while paramedics prepared unused equipment. The CEO had vanished without trace of struggle or forced entry. CFO David Kim provided his statement to police with visible trembling. She was reviewing quarterly reports 15 minutes ago. We discussed budget allocations, then I left to get additional files. When I returned, she was gone. Gone how? The detective asked. The door was locked from inside. I have no idea. The windows don't open. There's no other exit. She just disappeared. Thomas and Rachel slipped away to the parking garage, where her credentials provided access to the surveillance control room. The recorded footage revealed expertly edited gaps in the timeline, but Thomas spotted something others had missed. In the reflection on Valerie's computer screen, barely visible for 3 seconds, was a man entering through what appeared to be a wall panel. Service tunnel, Thomas muttered. Maintenance access between floors. Someone's been using the infrastructure to move unseen. He enhanced the reflection using skills that felt rusty after 3 years of disuse. The intruder's face was partially obscured, but Thomas could see enough to confirm his worst fears. Edgar Lorne had found him. The maintenance tunnels beneath Eden Tech formed a complex maze that most people never realized existed. Thomas and Rachel descended through a service hatch, their flashlights cutting through dusty darkness that hadn't been disturbed in months. Your daughter, Rachel said quietly as they navigated narrow passages. Is she safe? For now, Thomas replied, pausing to listen for movement ahead. But Edgar doesn't make idle threats. Edgar? Edgar Lorne, former NSA, former CIA, former ally. Now he's a freelance problem solver for clients who can afford his expertise. They found evidence of recent activity, fresh footprints, a discarded zip tie, traces of chloroform on a ventilation grate. Thomas studied the evidence with skills that felt both familiar and foreign. "He took her through here," Thomas said. "Two sets of prints entering, three leaving. She was unconscious but walking." Rachel's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. "Want to see Valerie Kessler alive? Bring Morrison. Web source code to Warehouse 47, Port District. Come alone. 3 hours." "They want both of us," Thomas realized. "Edgar knows you're Elizabeth Morrison's daughter. He knows you have access to the original files." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, analyzing scenarios. Every option led to the same conclusion. Edgar held overwhelming advantages, while direct confrontation would likely result in Valerie's death and their capture. "We give him what he wants," Thomas said finally. "But not the way he expects." They spent an hour preparing. Rachel modified her mother's source code, introducing subtle errors that wouldn't be immediately apparent but would cause critical failures under operational stress. Thomas used his knowledge of Edgar's patterns to predict variables and prepare contingencies. At 6:30, they stood in the parking lot of Warehouse 47, a derelict building where setting sun cast long shadows between abandoned structures. The only sounds were distant highway traffic and seagulls from the nearby harbor. They entered through the main loading dock, footsteps echoing in the vast space. Valerie Kessler sat tied to a chair in the center, gagged but alert and furious. Edgar Lorne stepped from the shadows, and Thomas felt 3 years collapse into this moment. His former partner looked older but retained the cold intelligence that had made him so dangerous. "Thomas Hale," Edgar said. "You've been playing janitor so long, I thought you'd forgotten your real profession." "What do you want, Edgar?" "What I've always wanted, completion of our mission." Edgar gestured to armed operatives emerging from concealment. Project Recall was supposed to revolutionize intelligence gathering. Memory extraction from unwilling subjects, implantation of false information, complete rewriting of personal history. Imagine the possibilities for social control. I've imagined them. That's why I destroyed the project. But it didn't die. It evolved, became commercialized. Thanks to Dr. Morrison and your contributions, we have the missing pieces. Edgar nodded to an operative with a tablet. "Upload the source code, Doctor. My employer is eager to begin testing." Rachel glanced at Thomas, who provided an almost imperceptible nod. She connected her laptop and began the transfer, adding final modifications in real time. "Valerie Kessler discovered your operation," Thomas said, buying time. She realized EdenTech was a front. "Miss, Kessler believed technology should serve humanity rather than control it," Edgar replied with contempt. "Charming idealism, but impractical." The transfer completed. "We have everything," the operative confirmed. "Code integrity appears clean." "Excellent." Edgar raised his weapon toward Thomas. "This is where our partnership ends." The lights went out. In absolute darkness, Thomas moved with muscle memory older than conscious thought. He rolled left, hearing Edgar's shot pass through empty space. Rachel had dropped behind a concrete pillar, and he could hear Valerie struggling against her restraints. Emergency lighting activated, bathing everything in hellish red. Thomas found himself behind shipping pallets while Edgar moved tactically toward his position. "You can't run forever, Thomas," Edgar called out. "Maybe not, but I have something you don't." "What's that?" "A reason to fight beyond money or power." Thomas threw his flashlight toward the far end, drawing Edgar's fire. In the same instant, he vaulted over the pallets and tackled one of Edgar's operatives, using momentum to drive the man into a concrete beam. Rachel had reached Valerie and was cutting through zip ties with a utility knife. The CEO appeared groggy but conscious, her eyes tracking the action with sharp intelligence. Edgar's remaining operative had Thomas pinned behind minimal cover, automatic fire chewing up concrete around his position. Thomas counted rounds, waiting for the reload pause. When it came, he moved. But Edgar was ready. Thomas found himself facing his former partner across 10 feet of open space, both armed, both drawing on decades of training. "The source code is corrupted, isn't it?" Edgar said, weapon steady. Dr. Morrison Vaughn sabotaged the upload. Rachel stepped into view, laptop held protectively. "The code will work perfectly for 6 hours. After that, it will begin corrupting host systems. Anyone connected to Chronocyte will experience progressive neural degradation." "Clever but pointless," Edgar smiled coldly. "I can extract the original files from your brain. The technology exists. Actually, it doesn't, said a new voice from the entrance. FBI agent Jennifer Hayes entered with badge visible and weapon drawn. Behind her, tactical units took positions around the building. Edgar Lorne, you're under arrest for kidnapping, conspiracy, and espionage violations, Hayes announced. Drop your weapons. Edgar laughed genuinely. Agent Hayes, still believing law enforcement can keep pace with technological evolution. In the moment Edgar's attention shifted, Thomas moved, not toward Edgar, but toward Rachel and Valerie, shielding them as Edgar's shot went wide. Federal tactical units swarmed the warehouse, but Edgar had vanished through a service tunnel behind a false wall panel. Hayes helped Thomas to his feet. We've been tracking Edgar's operation for 8 months. When we learned he'd contacted you, we knew he was close to something significant. How did you find us? Rachel held up her phone. GPS tracker activated when we entered. My mother built back doors into all her research. The investigation revealed the conspiracy's true scope. Eden Tech was one component of a vast network acquiring classified research from terminated government programs and converting it to commercial applications with dangerous potential for social control. The parent corporation, Mnemonic Holdings, operated as private equity specializing in companies with government intelligence contracts. Officially providing therapeutic services to veterans and abuse survivors, they were secretly developing comprehensive memory manipulation capabilities for political influence operations. Treatment records showed chronocyte being used on subjects with no trauma history, corporate executives, journalists, government officials receiving experimental therapy involving systematic memory modification and false implantation. Illegal human experimentation, Thomas realized, using medical cover to perfect psychological control techniques. The most shocking discovery came when Rachel accessed her mother's deepest encrypted files. Funding authorizations bore the signature of Senator Martin Crawford, former CIA director and current Senate Intelligence Committee chairman. Senator Crawford has positioned himself as a champion of government transparency and intelligence reform, Hayes said quietly. If he's involved in illegal memory manipulation targeting American citizens, the political implications are staggering. More than political, Thomas replied, studying financial records showing payments to Edgar's organization. Crawford has been using his Intelligence Committee position to eliminate anyone who might expose his operation. Hayes received an emergency transmission. Code red, safe house compromised. Agent down. Repeat, safe house compromised. Thomas felt his heart stop. Where's the safe house? Thomas, you can't. Emily is at that safe house. Where is my daughter? The federal safe house in suburban Arlington was surrounded by unmarked vehicles and FBI tactical units responding to the emergency. Thomas could see smoke rising from the building's rear, while his heart hammered against his ribs as he searched desperately for Emily. Hayes coordinated response through her radio. 2 agents wounded, 1 missing. The package is secure, but shaken. The package? Thomas demanded. Your daughter. She's safe, in the command vehicle. Thomas ran toward the armored truck, but Hayes caught his arm. Wait. There's something you need to know. What? The safe house wasn't attacked. It was infiltrated by someone with federal credentials who walked through our security. Thomas felt pieces clicking into place. Inside job, Edgar has people in the FBI. More than that. Hayes showed him surveillance footage on a tablet. Look at timestamp 1427. On screen, Thomas watched a familiar figure in an expensive suit approach the safe house. The man showed credentials to FBI agents, was admitted without question, and disappeared inside. 30 seconds later, smoke began pouring from windows. Senator Martin Crawford, Hayes said quietly. He personally authorized your daughter's security detail. He knew exactly where she was. Thomas stared at the screen, understanding Crawford's complete plan for eliminating inconvenient witnesses. This was never about acquiring Morrison Webb technology. It was about systematically eliminating everyone who knew about illegal research programs. Thomas! Emily's voice cut through his analysis. She was running toward him from the command vehicle, face streaked with tears, but eyes bright with relief. He caught her in his arms, feeling her solid weight, breathing in familiar scents of her shampoo mixed with lingering smoke. For precious moments, nothing else mattered. Dad, there was this man, Emily said, words tumbling together. He said he knew you, that he was helping, but something felt wrong. When smoke started, I hid in the bathroom until real FBI people found me. You did exactly right, sweetheart. Hayes approached with a heat-damaged laptop still functional enough to display a document titled Operation Tabula Rasa, a comprehensive plan for systematic elimination of all Project Recall personnel and their families. Thomas's name topped the list, marked Priority Alpha. Below were 12 others, including Rachel and Valerie. 6 names were already crossed out in red. "How long have you known?" Thomas asked Hayes. "About Crawford's involvement?" 3 days. "About Operation Tabula Rasa's full scope?" 3 hours. "And you didn't mention this?" "We needed proof. Crawford has been untouchable for 20 years. Accusations without evidence would have driven the operation deeper underground." Thomas studied the elimination list, his mind working through tactical scenarios. Crawford possessed Senate Intelligence Committee resources, unlimited funding through shell corporations, and operatives like Edgar invisible to conventional law enforcement. But he had a weakness. "Crawford made a tactical error," Thomas said, pointing to operational timeline details. "He's planning to eliminate all remaining targets within 48 hours. How is that a mistake? Because it indicates external pressure, some deadline forcing acceleration. People under stress make judgment errors." Rachel emerged from the command vehicle with her laptop. "I know what Crawford's deadline is. Tomorrow morning, the Senate Intelligence Committee votes on legislation mandating federal oversight of private companies conducting classified memory research." "Crawford's bill?" "Officially, yes, but if it passes, companies like Eden Tech face unannounced audits. Independent oversight would review all research activities." Thomas grasped the impossible trap Crawford had built. He's positioned himself as a reformer while secretly controlling the companies his legislation would regulate. If the bill passes and auditors discover what's really happening, his entire operation collapses, Hayes finished. So he needs to eliminate witnesses before tomorrow's vote. Which means Edgar will come for us tonight. Thomas's encrypted phone began ringing with a tone he hadn't heard in 3 years. The caller ID showed Edgar's number. "Edgar," Thomas answered. "Hello, old friend. I trust your daughter is recovering from her exciting afternoon." Thomas felt Emily tense at the familiar voice. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted. To complete our mission. You have something belonging to my employer, and I have something belonging to you." "I'm listening." "Valerie Kessler is my guest. She's comfortable, but her situation is temporary. I'll exchange her continued well-being for the original Morrison Web source code and your personal research files." "I don't have the original files." "Of course you do. Elizabeth Morrison gave you copies before her death, just as she gave duplicates to her daughter." Thomas met Rachel's eyes, seeing terrible realization reflected there. Elizabeth Morrison had known she was in danger. She had distributed her research as insurance, but that insurance had made her daughter a permanent target. "Where?" Thomas asked. "Where our partnership began. Building 47, Fort Meade, 1 hour." The line went dead, leaving Thomas staring at a phone that represented the end of 3 years of attempted invisibility. Hayes was coordinating with tactical teams, but Thomas knew conventional law enforcement would be useless against Edgar's operational experience. "I have to go," he said quietly. "Thomas, it's a trap." "Of course, it's a trap, but it's the only way to end this." He knelt to Emily's eye level, hands gentle on her shoulders. "I need you to stay with Agent Hayes no matter what happens. Even if things go wrong, you stay with her until I come back." "Dad, I'm scared." "I know, sweetheart. But remember algebra problems. Sometimes equations seem impossible, but there's always a solution if you're patient and clever enough to find it." Emily nodded with determination that reminded Thomas painfully of her mother's courage. Building 47 at Fort Meade had been abandoned for 6 years, victim of budget cuts and reorganization. Thomas approached alone, footsteps echoing in corridors where he had once briefed senators about memory manipulation possibilities. The main conference room remained exactly as remembered. Circular tables surrounded by chairs, wall-mounted displays that had shown classified presentations, and lingering smell of stale coffee mixed with broken dreams. Edgar stood at the far end, sidearm holstered but visible. Valerie Kessler sat in a chair, hands zip-tied but eyes alert and defiant. "You came alone," Edgar observed. "I'm impressed by your faith in negotiation. I came to finish this." Thomas placed his laptop on the table, revealing the Morrison Web source code, complete files, unmodified. Everything Elizabeth Morrison created, everything I contributed to Project Recall. Edgar approached cautiously, scanning the code. "Remarkable. Even after years, I'm amazed by your architectural elegance. Take it and go. Leave Valerie out of this. It's not that simple. Edgar closed the laptop. The technology was never the real prize. The real prize was the man who created it. What are you talking about? Senator Crawford has one final mission, a demonstration of Chronosight's capabilities. He wants you to extract specific memories from a test subject. Number. The test subject is your daughter. The words struck Thomas like physical blows. Behind Edgar, operatives escorted Emily into the room. She wasn't restrained, but Thomas could see terror in her eyes. "Dad?" she said, voice small and uncertain. "Emily, everything will be all right." Edgar smiled coldly. "The demonstration is simple. You'll use Chronosight to extract Emily's memories of the past week. Specifically, her recollections of the safe house incident and conversations about Operation Tabula Rasa. She's a child. She doesn't know anything. Perhaps not, but Crawford can't accept that risk. After extraction, we'll implant false recollections of a pleasant week with relatives. She'll never know what was taken." Thomas felt familiar coldness, but mixed with rage so pure it threatened his operational discipline. "And if I refuse? Then both she and Miss Kessler die, and Crawford finds another solution, probably involving tragic house fires and more crossed-off names." Thomas looked at Emily, seeing Sarah's courage in frightened but determined eyes, and made his decision. "I'll need the Chronosight interface." Edgar nodded to an operative who wheeled in familiar neural monitoring equipment. Thomas recognized components he'd helped design, but noticed modifications that would make extraction more efficient and traumatic. "Dad," Emily said quietly, "I trust you." Thomas felt something break inside his chest. His daughter's faith remained absolute even as he prepared to violate her mind in potentially permanently damaging ways. He initialized Chronosight, fingers moving through startup protocols memorized 15 years earlier. The neural mapping interface activated, displaying three-dimensional brain activity models. "Begin extraction," Edgar commanded. Thomas placed the neural interface on Emily's head with trembling hands. The system would analyze brain patterns and translate them into accessible memory files, allowing examination and extraction of specific recollections. "It might feel strange, sweetheart," Thomas said softly, "like remembering a dream." Emily nodded with unwavering trust. Thomas activated memory scanning, and displays illuminated with his daughter's mind's gorgeous architecture. Her memories flowed across screens like liquid light, beautiful and innocent and absolutely precious. He could see the safe house incident from her perspective. Confusion when smoke filled the building, FBI agents shouting orders, the moment she hid because something felt wrong about the man claiming to know her father. But he could also detect something else Edgar couldn't recognize because he hadn't built the system. Thomas had embedded a backdoor protocol in Chronosight's architecture, a hidden function allowing reversal of memory extraction. Instead of removing memories, he could implant them. And Emily's mind was perfectly positioned to receive specific memories that would change everything. Thomas began typing rapidly, fingers dancing across interface controls. On screens, Emily's memory patterns shifted, but not as Edgar expected. Instead of extracting recent recollections, Thomas was implanting something more valuable: complete contents of Operation Tabula Rasa, every name on Crawford's elimination list, every conspiracy detail, and all evidence needed to expose the network. But more than intelligence data, he was giving Emily something precious: memories of her mother he'd carried alone for 3 years. Sarah's voice and laughter, lullabies she sang, bedtime stories, the way she looked holding her newborn daughter. "What are you doing?" Edgar demanded, studying readouts with suspicion. "Giving her what she needs," Thomas replied. Memory implantation completed, and Thomas removed the interface with infinite gentleness. Emily blinked slowly, eyes focusing on his face with new understanding. "Dad," she said quietly, voice carrying wonder, "I remember, Mom. I remember everything." Edgar raised his weapon. "You've signed both death warrants." "No," said a commanding voice from the entrance. "He's given us exactly what we need." Senator Martin Crawford entered flanked by Secret Service agents, silver-haired and distinguished with presence that commanded congressional hearings and television interviews. "Senator," Edgar said with confusion, "the extraction failed. Thomas compromised everything." Actually, Edgar, the extraction succeeded beyond expectations. Crawford approached Chronosight displays, studying visible memory patterns. "Thomas has demonstrated the technology's capabilities in ways we never imagined." I don't understand. The child now possesses complete Operation Tabula Rasa knowledge embedded in long-term memory. Every classified detail, every elimination target, every research aspect. She's become a living archive of information that could destroy us. Crawford turned to Thomas with genuine admiration. Brilliant, Thomas. You've created a situation where eliminating your daughter would be pointless, because the information she carries is beyond our control. How? Because you designed Chronocyte with distributed backup protocols. Every processed memory uploads automatically to secure federal databases. Emily's implanted memories are now part of permanent government records. Thomas felt hope mixed with terror as old protocols functioned as designed, but that didn't guarantee Emily's safety. What happens now? He asked. Crawford smiled with authentic warmth. Now we negotiate terms benefiting everyone. The Senate Intelligence Committee hearing room overflowed with reporters, staff, and observers witnessing testimony that would reshape American intelligence policy. Thomas sat at the witness table with Emily beside him, facing senators about to hear revelations, ending careers, and launching investigations. 4 months had passed since Building 47. Edgar Lorne was in federal custody. Senator Crawford had resigned in disgrace, and Operation Tabula Rasa had been exposed through investigative articles earning a Pulitzer Prize. But the real victory was personal and meaningful. Emily raised her hand to be sworn in, voice clear and confident, promising complete truth. The memories Thomas implanted weren't just intelligence data about conspiracies and corruption, but precious recollections of her mother's love, her father's courage, and her own strength facing impossible circumstances. Miss Hale, the chairman said gently, please tell us what you remember about Operation Tabula Rasa and illegal memory manipulation programs. Emily spoke for 25 minutes, testimony precise and devastating to conspiracy participants. She described corporate networks stealing classified research, government officials betraying constitutional oaths, and systematic elimination of inconvenient witnesses. But she also spoke about memory's fundamental importance, how recollections shape personal identity, and the profound violation occurring when someone attempts stealing or manipulating past experiences. Memory isn't just stored information, Emily said, looking directly at television cameras broadcasting nationwide. It's the foundation of who we are. When you take away someone's memories or change them without permission, you're stealing their soul. After the hearing, Thomas and Emily walked through Capitol corridors that had witnessed centuries of American democracy. Rachel Morrison Vaughn joined them, her testimony about stolen research now part of official congressional record. What happens next? Rachel asked as they emerged into bright afternoon sunlight. Now we go home, Thomas replied, feeling lighter than he had in years. Emily has school tomorrow, and I have a new career beginning. Doing what? Thomas smiled with genuine contentment for the first time since Sarah's death. Teaching and healing. The FBI asked me to develop training protocols for detecting memory manipulation. There's growing demand for that expertise. They walked together through Washington streets, 3 people who had survived the dangerous intersection of advanced technology and corrupted power, carrying knowledge that some truths are worth preserving, regardless of personal cost. In his wallet, Thomas still carried Marcus Webb's final words. Memory is burden, forgetting is betrayal. But now he understood his old partner had been only partially correct about memory's nature and responsibility. Memory was indeed a burden that could weigh down souls with pain and regret. But it was also a precious gift, sacred responsibility, and sometimes, when shared with people you love most, a form of salvation healing wounds that seemed permanent. 8 months later, Thomas opened the Morrison Institute for Memory Recovery, a nonprofit organization helping trauma victims reclaim stolen recollections and rebuild psychological identities. Emily helped design the logo, an open eye surrounded by remember, recover, restore. On their first operational day, their initial client was Valerie Kessler, who had decided to undergo therapeutic treatment recovering memories suppressed during captivity and subsequent investigation. As Thomas prepared the therapeutic memory recovery protocol, a modified Chronocyte version designed for healing rather than exploitation, he reflected on his journey from government operative to invisible janitor to memory restoration specialist. The most important memories, he had learned, weren't ones you were trained to collect for intelligence purposes. They were ones you chose to preserve, protect, and share with people who mattered most. And sometimes, The most valuable gift you could offer another human being was the simple act of helping them remember who they really were beneath layers of pain and deception that life had imposed. Thomas looked at his daughter, now 13 and carrying within her mind precious memories of a mother she had barely known, and realized some forms of love transcend death, time, and even deliberate memory theft. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but filled with possibility, and for the first time in 4 years, Thomas Hale was no longer running from his past but walking confidently toward tomorrow.